Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the book of Ecclesiastes, and we're in chapter 5, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 7. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they are doing evil. Be not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes with much business, and a fool's voice with many words. When you vow a vow to God, do not delay paying it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not repay. Let not your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice and destroy the work of your hands? For when dreams increase and words grow many, there is vanity. But God is the one you must fear. This next section, I should say, beginning with chapter 5 and going through chapter 7, is going to be awfully dark and pessimistic. I want to mention two things before we start talking about these verses, just to remind us of some things we've already mentioned in our study. The first is that he states from the outset that he's only talking about things as they exist under the sun. He has taken eternity out of the equation altogether. And when you do that, when you take our eternal reward out of the equation, and all you're left with is life here on earth and nothing beyond, if the choice is not between heaven and hell but life and death, then it changes your outlook. It changes everything. Of course, eternity does exist, and God has prepared us for it. Before the foundation of the world. That's not the existence that we lead, but it is the existence some people think we lead. And therefore we are reminded quite clearly of what we're left with if there is no resurrection of the dead. As Paul will say in 1 Corinthians 15, if the dead are not raised, we are among all men the most to be pitied. The second thing I wanted to mention is that there are two different ways of looking at the same set of facts, and that's true in Scripture. And as an experiment, read Psalm 90 by Moses, and then Psalm 103 by David, which quotes Psalm 90. And it's, to me, a kind of response to it, a commentary to it. We have the same set of facts, that we're sinful, that life is brief, that we don't deserve God's love and grace, that what we deserve is his punishment. Those are true. Those are true facts that both Psalms admits. But there's so much more hope and light in Psalm 103 in David's outlook than there is in Moses' outlook in Psalm 90. And so the facts are the facts, and the things that he communicates as true are true. But he's taking the darker view of things, the dimmer view of things, the way Moses does. And I doubt Moses had the same knowledge of the Christ to come that David did. Moses certainly doesn't have the same feeling of being God's child that David does, although he was God's friend and they spoke together as a man does his friend face to face. I don't know anybody had a more intimate relationship with God than Moses, but it was an intermediary relationship between God and his people. And it was hard on him. You just have to read the biblical account. Solomon, in this passage, is looking at life through Moses' glasses, not through David's glasses. And so we should not be surprised at the darkness here. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. God does have a house because Solomon was able to build it, and it would stand for a little more than 400 years before it was destroyed by the Babylonians. The things that he tells us, to draw near to listen is better. Watch what you say before God. Of course, David reminds us in Psalm 139, God knows the word on our tongue before we even utter it. if you're going to make a vow, pay your vow to God and don't be slow. It's better not to make a vow at all. And to talk about God's anger, you know, everything that he says about being careful with your words, about being true to God and being honest with God. Those things are eternally true. But as we say, it leads to not God's grace but God's anger. I want to also mention something about dreams in this passage. Dreams were sought after by most people in the ancient Near East, but Solomon takes a dim view of dreams as something that will guide your course, unless, of course, God gives you the gift, as he would Daniel later on, to interpret those dreams, or Joseph earlier. There were a lot of people who claimed to interpret dreams. Solomon is taking a dim view of them. Solomon is a man of wisdom, a man of logic, a man of precise thinking, and he takes a dim view of that, of those, and of an overwhelming number of words, brevity, paucity, clarity in your speech and in your thought. That's what he's arguing for, and that's clearly what's communicated throughout the book of Proverbs as well. And that's exactly the way Jesus lived his life. So anyway, we're going to pick up with verse 8 next time. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.